What if the exact same biological mechanism that drives a person to, smoke freebase cocaine is the exact same mechanism driving your chronic paralyzing worry?
Right, or your absolute inability to walk away from a toxic relationship.
Exactly. I mean, we tend to compartmentalize these things so much. We put heavy substance use in this box-labeled disease, right?
Oh, totally. We treat it as a medical emergency.
Yeah, and then we put things like perfectionism or chronic stress or even our need for external validation into a completely different box, a box labeled like personality traits or quirks.
Which is wild, because we categorize them purely by their outward appearance.
Hmm.
I mean, the severity of the physical destruction is vastly different, obviously.
Right, right. A drug addiction destroys the physical body.
Yeah, your body, your bank accounts,
Yeah.
and it happens very visibly and very quickly. But chronic worry or the desperate pursuit of validation, that destroys a life quietly.
From the inside out.
Exactly, from the inside out. But if you peel back the layers, it reveals that fundamentally, the root engine powering both of those destructive cycles is actually identical.
Which brings us to our mission today. We are going on a deep dive into the concept of soul recovery.
Yes, this is such an important topic.
It really is. We are pulling this from the life, the deeply personal work, and the incredible trajectory of author and teacher Ester Nicholson. Plus, we've got some fascinating clinical insights from somatic counselor Nina Pick to back it all up.
The goal here is to completely redefine how you look at addiction, at dependence, and, well, the whole path to reclaiming a shattered sense of self-worth.
Right. And to set the stakes for this conversation, we really have to look closely at Ester Nicholson's story.
Because she is the ultimate testing ground for this theory. I mean, her life was not just a gentle downward slope.
No, it was a devastating freefall.
Absolutely. She was a teenage mother. She suffered through profound emotional abuse, and she eventually found herself completely lost in a life-threatening freebase cocaine addiction.
And trapped in severe domestic violence on top of that.
Yeah, it was incredibly dark.
But, and this is the crazy part, she eventually pulled herself out of that darkness to become a highly successful, renowned vocalist. I mean, she was singing alongside legends like Bette Midler and Rod Stewart.
It's a staggering turnaround. It really is.
It is, but the most vital part of this deep dive isn't just the fact that she survived, or that she got clean. It's the mechanics of how she managed to transform that deep underlying dependence into actual sustainable power.
Right. Because our sources argue that you can separate a person from their drug of choice, sure. But if their foundational identity remains broken, they are still in grave danger.
Which is terrifying.
It is. So to understand how Esther actually healed, we first have to understand her definition of what she was suffering from in the first place.
Which she calls the bottomless pit.
Yes, the bottomless pit.
Yeah.
Because yes, her specific drug of choice was freebase cocaine. But she eventually realized the substance was merely a tool.
A tool to do what, exactly?
Well, the addiction itself was a desperate, ongoing attempt to fill a hungry soul and a broken heart with literally anything external.
So she was trying to plug this massive spiritual and emotional hole.
Precisely. And she notes that she was addicted to filling that void, not just with drugs, but with love, with men, with food, anything she could get her hands on.
The substance or the behavior was simply the most effective shovel she could find, right? Just throwing dirt into a bottomless pit.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But let me push back on this a little bit, though. Because it is very easy to see how a physical dependency on crack cocaine is an addiction. It literally alters your brain chemistry. Your body physically requires it to function.
Right, the biological dependence.
Yeah. So if we apply the word addiction to an emotion like, oh, I'm addicted to worry or I'm addicted to the drama of my toxic relationship, aren't we risking, diluting the clinical reality of what true addiction is?
That is a very fair point, and Esther actually anticipates that exact skepticism. She argues that addiction, at its absolute core, is characterized by the loss of the ability to choose.
Okay, the loss of choice.
Exactly. When you are addicted to a substance, you lose the ability to choose sobriety. When you are addicted to a paradigm of struggle or a victim narrative or chronic anxiety, you lose the ability to choose peace.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you cannot simply decide to stop worrying, just as a person cannot simply decide to stop using a drug without some kind of massive intervention.
Because you're compulsively drawn back to the behavior despite all the negative consequences.
Precisely. And her philosophy points out that this compulsion doesn't just spontaneously generate in a vacuum. It requires a foundational environment to take root.
A foothold, I think she calls it.
Yes, a foothold. And this foothold is always made of unworthiness, a profound lack of purpose, and a major crisis of self-worth.
So without that internal environment of feeling unworthy, the addiction actually has nothing to attach itself to.
Exactly. Which is why she redefines addiction fundamentally as an identity disease.
Hmm.
It is a spiritual malady based on the deeply held but entirely erroneous belief that we are separated from our own wholeness.
So the behavior, then, whether it's the drug use or the obsessive worrying, is really merely a symptom of the fractured identity.
Exactly it.
To ground this concept in modern psychology, we can actually look at the supporting source from somatic counselor Nina Pick. She explores these recovery concepts through the lens of nervous system science, which I found so fascinating.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Right. Because she uses attachment theory and polyvagal theory to explain the actual biology behind this spiritual crisis.
And the clinical science here perfectly mirrors the spiritual concept of Esther's bottomless pit. Nina Pick uses attachment theory, which studies how early childhood bonds form our core template for safety and self-worth.
Because human infants are born completely dependent on caregivers,
Yeah.
right?
Right. And when an environment is safe and loving, the child's brain wires itself to believe the world is safe and that they are inherently valuable. But when a child experiences neglect or emotional abuse or trauma, as Esther did in her youth,
That foundational template is completely shattered.
exactly, the child internalizes the trauma as evidence that they are fundamentally flawed.
So that is the biological creation of Esther's foothold of unworthiness. The brain literally wires itself to believe it is damaged goods.
Yes. And then Pick brings in polyvagal theory to explain how the body actually manages this trauma. Polyvagal theory maps the vagus nerve, which acts as an information superhighway between the brain and the body's organs.
Okay, the vagus nerve.
Yeah. It introduces this concept of neuroception, which is the nervous system's subconscious, 24/7 scanning for safety or danger,
Like a background radar.
exactly like a radar.
Mm-hmm.
And when an individual has severe unresolved trauma, their nervous system becomes chronically dysregulated. It gets stuck in a perpetual state of fight, flight, or freeze. The internal alarm bells basically never turn off.
Oh, man. So the psychological and physical pain of living in that constant state of high alert, of feeling entirely unworthy and totally unsafe, it just becomes absolutely intolerable.
You literally cannot live like that without breaking.
So the body and the mind demand an escape hatch.
And this is exactly where the addiction steps in. It serves a highly functional, sophisticated purpose.
Wait, functional?
Yes. The freebase cocaine, the obsession with a toxic partner, or the chronic cycle of worry, these are incredibly deep survival strategies. They artificially regulate a dysregulated nervous system.
Oh, okay, I see. Because the drug forces a chemical shift that temporarily numbs the intolerable pain.
Right. And the toxic relationship provides a hit of adrenaline or a temporary illusion of being wanted, which just distracts the nervous system from that awful void of unworthiness.
So they are actually brilliant short-term adaptations. Your brain found a way to keep you alive and functioning in an environment where your identity and your safety were under constant threat.
That's the tragic irony of it. The tragic flaw in the design is that the adaptation eventually becomes the primary threat to survival.
Right. The mechanism that saves you in the short term will absolutely destroy you in the long term if it becomes your only method of coping.
Precisely.
So, if we accept that addiction is a biological and emotional survival strategy meant to protect a broken identity, the obvious question becomes, how do you fix the underlying identity?
Which is the hardest part.
Yeah. Esther tried the traditional behavioral route first, and she hit a terrifying roadblock.
She did. After years of absolute devastation, she shares this awful incident where she lied about the death of her sister just to cover up a drug-related absence from work.
Wow.
Yeah, it really illustrates the absolute grip of the compulsion. But she eventually made her way to Alcoholics Anonymous.
She hit rock bottom.
She did. She surrendered, and she embraced the cornerstone of the traditional 12-step program. She admitted she was powerless over her addictions.
And she did the grueling work of getting clean.
She did the work. But the sources reveal this chilling realization she had. At 2 years sober, Esther found herself feeling incredibly fragile. She felt like she was in constant danger of slipping backward.
She was white-knuckling her sobriety.
Exactly. The structure of the program has successfully removed the primary symptom, the drug use, but she hadn't resolved the underlying identity disease.
The biological and spiritual foothold of unworthiness was just sitting there, completely intact.
Yes, waiting for an opportunity.
Wait, so if the 12 steps worked to get her clean, but left her feeling like damaged goods who was constantly on the verge of a relapse, doesn't that imply there's a foundational flaw in how we treat addiction globally? Like we focus so heavily on just stopping the behavior.
It definitely exposes a massive vulnerability in the traditional recovery model, specifically regarding subconscious sabotage.
Subconscious sabotage. Unpack that for us.
Well, the 12-step program is historically brilliant at providing structure, teaching accountability, and breaking the physical cycle of substance abuse. But Esther recognized a paralyzing psychological conflict within herself.
Okay.
She was attending meetings, she was praying, she was affirming positive choices, but her foundational subconscious belief system still broadcasted a relentless message.
Which was, I am broken, I am damaged goods, I am unworthy.
Exactly.
It makes me think of an autoimmune response in the human body.
Well, that's a good analogy. How so?
Well, imagine you have a failing organ, so the doctors perform a transplant. They introduce a perfectly healthy, life-saving organ into your body. That new organ is the newfound sobriety.
Right, right.
But if your immune system, your deep, subconscious core identity, is fundamentally programmed to recognize itself as flawed, it will detect that healthy, positive presence as a foreign invader.
Wow, yes?
Your psychological immune system will literally attack the sobriety, trying to destroy it so the system can return to its familiar baseline of destruction and unworthiness.
That is exactly what happens. The cognitive and spiritual dissonance creates an incredibly volatile state. Esther noted that we can pray and affirm all day long, but if we subconsciously believe the exact opposite of our affirmations, our actions will eventually align with the subconscious belief.
Because the subconscious always wins.
It always wins. This is why people recycle the exact same issues over and over again. You might successfully put down the crack pipe through sheer willpower and accountability, but you will almost immediately pick up a toxic relationship.
Or you put down the alcohol, but you pick up crippling perfectionism and just work yourself into an early grave.
Exactly. The survival strategy simply shifts forms because the dysregulated nervous system still demands a regulator. The internal alarm bells are still ringing.
So Esther realized a non-linear jump in awareness was required to actually cure the disease. Modifying her behavior just wasn't enough anymore.
She had to address the root belief of who she actually was. She had to heal the identity itself. And while the 12 steps were keeping her alive, they just weren't designed to completely rebuild that foundational layer of spiritual and psychological identity.
But she didn't abandon the 12 steps, though. I think that's really important to point out. She didn't declare the traditional model useless.
No, not at all. Instead, she actively sought out the missing link. She needed a fundamental state change in her awareness, which ultimately led to a complete redefinition of her spirituality.
And this realization was the genesis of what she calls soul recovery.
Right. It required a massive theological shift in how she viewed the divine, which in turn revolutionized how she viewed herself.
So early in her sobriety, Esther attended a service led by a spiritual director named Michael Bernard Beckwith. Many of you listening might actually recognize his name from his appearance in the movie The Secret.
Yes, he's very well known.
He teaches from a metaphysical perspective known as New Thought. And for Esther, encountering this philosophy was completely earth-shattering.
We really have to consider the religious context she was bringing into that room. Esther grew up with a Baptist background, and for many individuals, that specific background can sometimes instill a very external, two-dimensional view of God.
Like an angry, withholding figure sitting in judgment of your sins.
Exactly. And think about it. If your core identity, built through childhood trauma, is already saying, I am unworthy and broken, and angry, judging God doesn't offer an escape.
No, it just serves as the ultimate divine validation of your own corrupted core code.
Right. The highest power in the universe agrees that you are damaged goods.
Ooh, that is heavy.
It is. But Beckwith's teachings introduced her to a completely redefined concept of the divine. New Thought philosophy, which emerged in the early 20th century, focuses heavily on the idea that the divine is not an external judge, but an inherent internal presence.
The spirit within.
Yes. Beckwith taught about an infinite love and an essential unity that Esther was already a part of, rather than separated from.
Let's examine why a theological shift like that carries such immense clinical weight. Why does redefining God help cure an addiction to crack cocaine or chronic worry?
Well, why do you think?
I think it matters because it acts as a direct, lethal strike against the foothold of unworthiness. If you genuinely begin to believe you are a direct expression of the divine, inherently whole and created out of infinite love, you cannot simultaneously believe you are permanent, irredeemable, damaged goods.
Exactly. The human brain simply cannot hold both of those core beliefs as absolute truth at the same time. One has to give.
So Esther took this revelation and synthesized two seemingly disparate worlds to create the 12 keys.
She took the brilliant, necessary accountability, the rigorous honesty, and the structure of the traditional 12 steps, and fused them directly with the spiritual technology of New Thought.
She describes this process as lifting heavier spiritual weight.
I love that phrase, because neither teaching by itself held the complete formula for her healing. The 12 steps forced her to take inventory of her actions and take accountability for the wreckage of her past.
But the New Thought practices, which include daily affirmative prayer, meditation, and radical forgiveness, provided the actual mechanism to rebuild the soul.
And look at how affirmative prayer actually functions as a psychological tool. Traditional prayer often involves begging an external deity to fix a problem or remove a character flaw.
Which subtly reinforces the idea that you are helpless and broken.
Exactly. But affirmative prayer, in the New Thought tradition, involves declaring an existing spiritual truth. It is the practice of affirming that you are already whole, already safe, and already loved.
From a neurological standpoint, repeating those affirmations and engaging in deep meditation actively rewrites the brain's neural pathways.
It really does. It leverages neuroplasticity to gradually convince the amygdala that the environment is no longer hostile.
It creates a physical state change. This 12-week fusion process targets childhood trauma, issues of abandonment, shame, rejection, and guilt by systematically addressing any belief that is incongruent with your essential wholeness.
And when a person consciously connects to this inherent power, they're restored to balance. The cravings simply dissolve.
They dissolve because the individual is no longer operating at the vibrational frequency of powerlessness.
Bringing this full circle back to Nina Pick's somatic perspective, if an addiction is a biological survival strategy for a dysregulated nervous system overwhelmed by fear and powerlessness,
Right.
what physically happens when the nervous system finally receives the signal that it is safe? What happens when the vagus nerve stops scanning for threats because the individual genuinely believes they hold inherent power and are unconditionally loved?
The survival strategy becomes obsolete. The alarm bells finally turn off.
Exactly. You no longer require the external substance or the toxic behavior to numb the pain, because the profound pain of unworthiness has been cured by the realization of your own wholeness.
You aren't suppressing a craving through sheer willpower anymore. The craving actually loses its entire biological and psychological reason for existing.
And this is the critical distinction between surviving and truly recovering.
Because other individuals might spend decades holding on to their sobriety by their fingernails, just perpetually terrified of a relapse.
Right. But by laying her trauma, her behaviors, and her broken beliefs on what she calls the inner altar, and by blending rigorous accountability with a radical re-identification of the self, Esther found a source of unshakable power through the crucible of her addiction.
The results speak for themselves. She didn't just survive her past, she thrived in spite of it. She achieved total harmony.
She became an acclaimed vocalist, an author, a teacher.
She took an intensely painful, chaotic journey of wounding and being wounded and transmuted it into a practical map for thousands of others. She travels the world teaching this curriculum, showing people how to engage both the heart and the mind to permanently heal their dependence.
She succeeded because she recognized the disease for what it truly was, an affliction of the identity. By addressing the root cause at that foundational layer, individuals respond much more powerfully and permanently to the central principles of forgiveness and compassion.
It is a radically compassionate approach to healing, and bringing the focus directly back to you, the listener. The core message Esther wants to impart, really the entire driving force behind her work, is a reminder of a truth that is incredibly easy to lose sight of when you are in the trenches of your own struggles.
Her message is profound in its simplicity. I want you to know that you were not created as an addict. You were not made from broken, damaged goods. You were created whole and beautiful. You were created out of infinite love.
She makes a very crucial distinction regarding our origins. She notes that even if you were not born into a loving environment, even if your childhood was defined by neglect or violence, you are still created out of love.
Yes, your environment, your specific traumas, the terrible things you experienced, they might have blocked your access to that essential nature. They might have severely distorted your view of yourself.
But they lack the power to actually destroy your innate wholeness. You are not permanently damaged. You are simply suffering from spiritual and emotional amnesia. You have forgotten your own divinity.
Soul recovery is not a process of building a new person from scratch. It is simply the process of remembering.
Remembering.
Yeah. It is uncovering the part of you that remembers exactly who you are and allowing that part to return to its original state of freedom and magnificence.
As we conclude this deep dive, consider how these mechanisms are operating in your own life right now. Think deeply about the behaviors you use to cope with stress or discomfort. Look beyond the obvious vices. Examine the subtle, socially acceptable survival strategies.
Like, are you scrolling on your phone for 3 hours every night to completely numb out? Are you overworking yourself to the point of physical burnout just to feel a fleeting sense of value?
Are you obsessing over perfection to avoid the possibility of criticism?
Recognize those actions for what they are. They are highly sophisticated attempts by your nervous system to regulate an underlying fear.
Ask yourself, what broken story about your identity are you subconsciously trying to protect with those behaviors? Are you exhausted from trying to prove you aren't a failure? Are you using drama to numb the lingering suspicion that you aren't enough?
Locate the corrupted core code running quietly in the background of your mind.
And finally, what would happen tomorrow if you woke up and simply remembered that you are already whole? If the identity disease was completely cured and you no longer needed to shovel dirt into a bottomless pit because you finally realized you were never empty to begin with? It's a profound thought to explore. We'll leave you with that.